Okay, welcome back to our Anxiety Power Shift series. I'm so excited to dive into the next concept because each of these concepts I've really sat down and thought about what is going to move you from being in an anxious state where you're not feeling confident in yourself, you're feeling that anxiety starting to bubble up and you're wanting to shift out of it. What are those key concepts that I love teaching people that really help them? Now, this one is a classic. I go back to it all the time. And in fact, I'm trying to think about when it first occurred to me, this idea that you are not your thoughts. So, if you know me and you've heard my story before, you know that anxiety for me started around the time that my parents got divorced. Before that, it was always there a little bit. I wanted to be that high achiever at school. I wanted everyone to like me. I cared a lot about what people thought of me, what my grades were. I definitely didn't want to fail. That would have been, failing on a test would have been, it just wasn't even in the realm of possibility for me. Such was my high functioning anxiety. But when my parents got divorced, that's when there was this real uncertainty that entered my life. And, it's so funny. People keep talking about uncertainty being a thing that has come into our lives recently, but uncertainty's always been there. It's always been a factor of life. But I really awakened to it when that solid foundation, my family unit, was kind of shattered. It was almost like standing on ground you thought was solid and then falling right through underneath. And suddenly everything in my life I thought was solid became permeable, temporary, unstable, and uncertain. And when we have a trauma in our lives, when we go through a big shocking event that really scares us and shakes our sense of who we are, this is what happens. We get triggered into anxiety. I woke up every morning after that thinking like something's gone wrong and something else is going to go wrong. And so in that time, I was really seeking things that could help me. Where could I find answers? And many of you might know this story already, but I started to go down the path of looking at food I was eating, and maybe I could get that right. If I could eat the perfect diet, if I could nourish myself in that way, then maybe I would have, better mental health. Maybe I would feel better about the world because I can control that. But of course, I went too far down that road, too controlling, and I didn't see that there needed to be a holistic approach where it's not just the food you eat, or, we can't just eat an anti-anxiety diet. It doesn't exist, I'm afraid. Even just healing our gut is not enough. We need to look at the whole picture, which is why when I do this work, it's always a mind, body, and soul approach. And I say soul because that connection to our intuition and building a sense of trust in life, in the universe supporting you, something greater than you, has been fundamental for the work that I do, the results I get with my clients and my program members, but also in my own personal life. I've really worked on cultivating a sense of trust in life, and that comes from believing in what we can't see. How can we get a sense of safety otherwise? And I think it's helpful too to understand that if you struggle with that, you're already very good at believing in things you can't see, because anxiety is always getting you to believe in a reality, a future that doesn't exist yet. And you believe it. You believe something bad's going to happen, but you don't know. So you might as well tell yourself a better lie, which is the lie that, well, none of it's a lie. We don't know yet how your future is going to go. So you might as well tell yourself something that serves you. But during this time, I was recommended a book. And in fact, I've got it here with me right now. It's called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It is a well-loved book. I've dog-eared the pages, but when I first picked it up, it was something that really confronted me. I mean, I would have been 20 years old picking this up, and it's a heavy book. It is deep Buddhism. And in the first pages, it starts to tell you that we should be meditating on our death every moment of our waking lives. And that was a lot for a 20-year-old, living in Australia, not in the Western world, not familiar with such ideas, and didn't really think about death, didn't really want to think about those kind of things, as I'm sure many of you can relate. So I picked up this book and I was immediately very confronted by it, wasn't interested in it. I mean, there were parts of it I liked, but most of it felt really, really deep and really heavy. And I sort of felt like most of my friends, most of the people around me were out partying. They were, kissing boys and making mistakes and getting drunk and like just living life. And there I was reading this really heavy, intense book about Buddhism. However, there was a element to it that I didn't forget. And this was the idea, the awakening, that we have something called an ego. We have a mind. We have this part of ourselves that isn't really real. And I know that can sound like a lot when you hear it the first time, or maybe being reminded of it. There's always a part of us that is a complete false fabrication, an identity that we've built up based on what other people have told us and what we've picked up in our lives and what we've decided about ourselves, usually based on what other people have told us. So when we have these limitations around ourselves, maybe you believe that you're not a smart person, or maybe you believe that your earning capacity is at this point, like there's a limit to it. When you have these limiting beliefs in yourself, they are complete BS. You've made them up because you are not your thoughts. These are just thoughts that you have. And there is a much truer part of you. And in this Buddhist philosophy, which is the backbone of pretty much everything I teach, it's something I think about constantly. It informs my life. This is how I teach what I teach, working with anxiety, is based on these Buddhist concepts, accepting that life is impermanent, accepting that there is constant change, finding a peace despite the chaos of life, and seeing through all the chaos of life, seeing how futile it is trying to fix the world when the world is never designed to be fixed. It will always have problems. And when you have a mind, the mind you have will always try to find problems and solve them. So it's kind of like this insane cycle we end up getting in, especially when we have an anxious mind, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So the reason why this is beneficial, understanding that you are not your thoughts, is that you get to see you now can create a whole new identity. You don't have to be an anxious person. This is what I mean when I say you are not an anxious person. It's the first thing that we cover when we work through the Anxiety Reset program. I believe it's week 1. I take you through a video and a training and we go deep into that concept, because when we tell ourselves I'm an anxious person, it's kind of like saying there's this thing that's wrong with you. When we believe there's something wrong with us, we're going to generate more anxiety and we're going to stay stuck in that perpetual cascade. Now, you actually have this other part of you that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. There is a part of you that is peaceful and calm within at all times. And from there, we can choose to create a different identity of ourselves. We can choose to value different parts of ourselves and always find, even if you lost your job, even if you had no one love you in your life, even if you felt like you were completely unattractive and had no money and all the things that we tend to build our ego upon and build our self-esteem upon, if all of that was taken away from you, there's still a part within us where we can find peace. And it's that we have to start to cultivate, because I often think of my life like I can't change the fact, and neither can you, that we are going to age and our physical appearance is temporary. And so I'm very wary of attaching too much of my self-esteem on how I look, because I know that's not something I'm going to have forever. And that's something that's going to change. And I've been very aware of that. And I will say thankfully, because of just the way I've watched my mum manage her aging and not like it and fight against it, and watching it really challenge her sense of self-worth and sense of self-esteem. So we've got no choice but to find this true higher perspective within us, where there is a place of you in you that's valuable no matter what. And even when you're in an anxious moment, even when there's fear there is a higher perspective available to you. These two parts of you, remember, there's your ego and your mind, and then there's this truer part of you, your higher self, that can look down and see that you're in fear and see that it's BS and see right through it. And in that, you get a power shift. In that, you have the ability to see through the fear, through the anxiety, and see this is just a cycle of thoughts. This is just sentences running through my mind that are not necessarily true. They're just thoughts. A thought is just a thought. It has no truth to it unless you tell yourself it's true. So what do you want to start telling yourself is true about you? Now that you can see how false the ego is, that it's just this collection of stories you've picked up because, hey, maybe you tried to complete a maths test once and you failed. And so therefore you told yourself, I'm terrible at maths and I'm stupid. When that's not necessarily true. Maybe you just needed more practice. You've got a brain. You can do a lot of things. You're a human being. You are very, very capable of, you're wildly capable of more than you realize, if we would just open our minds to that possibility. So these stories we start to accrue based on what feedback we get from others, that's all BS too. Now you get a clean slate. Now you have the ability to choose who you are. And I highly recommend starting to cultivate the identity that you are not an anxious person. Stop telling people I'm an anxious person. Stop telling yourself you have this big problem with anxiety. I don't ever say I have a big problem with anxiety anymore, because honestly, when anxiety comes up for me, I know what to do. I feel empowered in those situations. I can access my higher self and look down on that fear and see right through it and grab my power back. And you can do that too. There's no way I've just become magical at this. You know, I learned a skill and I practiced it and I was consistent with it. And you can do the very same thing. I've got a whole program that takes you through it, the Anxiety Reset program. You can sign up today. It takes you through 90 days of this process. That's why we have the audio tracks that you listen to every day that start to condition your mind and help you shift constantly. But if you can take away one thing today, it is that you are not your thoughts. You're not an anxious person. Stop telling yourself you are one and start moving into this understanding that you can be whoever you want it to be. You can change that identity for yourself. So start doing it today. I hope that's been really helpful for you. I'm just loving sharing this with everyone and look forward to chatting to you soon.